Welcome to Apex Apologetic, where we're all about connecting young minds to Christian truth. Here, we dive into the big questions, tackle doubts, and explore the powerful truths of Christianity in today's world. Our mission is to empower you to understand, defend, and confidently live out your faith. If you're ready to build a resilient, reasoned faith, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Shaun Michael. Let's go! Welcome back to the Apex Apologetic Podcast, where faith meets reason and we tackle the big questions that keep you up at night, or at least make for awkward family dinners. I'm your host, Shaun Michael, and if you were with us last time, we dove into the world of logic and reasoning, laying out how not to argue like a YouTube comment section. All right, no, but seriously, if you missed it, go back and listen. You'll thank me next time you're stuck in one of those pesky X debates. Now today, we're turning our attention to an age-old conversation, faith versus science, or as some people like to frame it, are Christians just anti-science cave dwellers who think the earth is 6,000 years old and that dinosaurs are a hoax? No, not at all. We're not scared of science. In fact, we're pretty big fans. After all, it's just a method for discovering the world that God's made. Now, let's be real. If I had a nickel for every time someone said, science says we don't need God, I wouldn't need to start a Patreon account. But here's the reality. Science doesn't say anything. Science isn't some cosmic guru sitting on a mountain of lab coats and microscopes handing out divine truths. It's a method, a tool, like a hammer. And you wouldn't say, the hammer says this house is structurally sound. No, that's ridiculous. Unless your hammer talks, then I don't really know what to tell you, all right? But for real, all right, let me illustrate this another way. Imagine a detective walking into a room with a locked door, a broken vase, and a faint smell of cookies. The scientific method is like the detective's flashlight. It helps him see the clues in the dark, but the flashlight doesn't tell him who broke the vase or why there's a locked door. That requires reasoning, context, and maybe a little coffee for brain fuel. Similarly, science shines a light on the physical world, but it can't tell us who set it up or why it exists in the first place. And that brings us to our key question for today. What's the real relationship between faith and science? Can they coexist, or are they destined to be those awkward roommates fighting over who left the cosmic milk out? And here's the rub. Not only can they coexist, but they complement each other beautifully. Now, for those clinging to a purely naturalistic worldview, as we talked about in past episodes, if science is your only method of knowing anything, you're already in big trouble. Why? Because the scientific method can't prove things like love, logic, or morality. Those are immaterial realities that can't be tested in a lab. And fun fact, the scientific method also can't explain itself. You'd need philosophy to do that. And if you're relying on an atheistic naturalism, you've just undermined your own worldview. You've got a method without meaning. So buckle up, because today we're breaking down the myths, exposing the limits of science, and showing how faith not only works hand in hand with science, but gives it purpose. So let's dive in and uncover the real relationship between faith and science. So here's the big myth you may hear from armchair skeptic ideologues, that faith and science are mortal enemies, locked in some sort of death match over who gets custody of reality. That's nonsense. It's like saying you have to choose between enjoying music or understanding the math behind sound waves. Well, why not both? First off, let's just bust the idea that faith is just blind belief. We've already dealt with that. Skeptics love to paint faith as a leap into the dark, a crutch for people who can't handle reality. But here's the irony. Even the most hardcore scientists operate on faith. They may deny this, but think about it. When a scientist sets up an experiment, they're assuming that the universe operates in a consistent, orderly way, that the laws of physics today will be the same tomorrow. And that confidence, my friends, or the words Latin confide, with faith, like it or not, that is exercising faith, or trust, or confidence. It's not blind, it's based on evidence of past consistency, but it's faith nonetheless. Now, on the flip side, let's take a look at science. skeptics often crown science as the ultimate bastion of rationality, free from bias or presuppositions. But let me ask you this: can science prove its own methods are valid? Nope. That's a philosophical assumption. Can science tell you why you ought to use it as your primary way of knowing? Again, no. That's a moral question, not a scientific one. Faith and science aren't enemies, they're teammates. Faith gives science its foundation, and science explores the physical truths that faith already expects to find. So let's dismantle another favorite skeptic soundbite. It's that science says, okay? That's ridiculous, because the last time I checked, science doesn't say anything. Science is a method, a way of testing hypotheses and drawing conclusions from observations. The conclusions come from scientists, who are human beings with biases, assumptions, and agendas. And here's a fun thought experiment, all right? Imagine this. Imagine 10 scientists studying the same set of data about the origin of the universe. All right, one might say, this points to the multiverse. Another might say, this proves the universe is finely tuned for life. And a third might say, it's just random chance. Who's right? Science doesn't decide that, the scientists do. And their interpretations are filtered through their worldviews. So, the next time someone smugly declares, science says God doesn't exist, ask them, which scientist said that? And based off what interpretation of the data? I want you to watch the gears start turning. Now, let's go ahead and dismantle the idea that science is this monolithic field where everyone agrees on everything. All right, I have a news flash for you. Scientists disagree all the time. Just look at cosmology. Some scientists swear by the Big Bang, others steady state, while some are still exploring alternatives. Or biology, right? Debates rage over evolutionary mechanisms and the origin of life. And ethics? Forget about it. You'll find as many opinions as there are scientists in the room. If science were the infallible oracle skeptics make it out to be, why are there so many competing theories? Well, here's the thing. Reducing the conversation to science versus faith is a lazy oversimplification. It's like saying, do you prefer art or math? When we all know both are essential to understanding the world. Faith answers the ultimate why questions. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why do we have consciousness? Science answers the how questions. How do neurons fire? How does gravity work? When we pit them up against each other, we miss the big picture, okay? So let's clear up some historical baggage that's out there, the so-called conflict thesis, the idea that Christianity has always been at war with science. That's about as accurate as a GPS in the Bermuda Triangle, okay? The reality is, many of history's greatest scientific minds, Kepler, Newton, Pascal, were theists who saw science as a way to understand God's creation. And let's ask some tough questions. If the universe is just a random accident, why is it so orderly, so finely tuned? Why can we even do science in the first place? Why is the universe intelligible? Why does every culture in human history have a sense of morality and purpose that science can't explain? And if science is the only way of knowing things, how do you know that? Science can't prove its own reliability. That's a philosophical assumption, as we mentioned before. So, skeptics, I challenge you, dig deeper. Are you sure your worldview holds up under tough scrutiny? So here's the takeaway. Faith and science aren't enemies. They're allies in the pursuit of truth. Science shines a light on the mechanisms of the universe, but faith reveals the meaning behind it. The real conflict isn't between faith and science. It's between a worldview that admits its limits and one that pretends it doesn't have any. The question isn't whether faith and science can coexist. The question is whether naturalism can survive its own inconsistencies. And it can't. All right, next, let's transition to exploring where science reaches its limits and how faith steps in to complete the picture. All right, so let's keep digging here. Let's get something straight. Science is an amazing tool. It's what brought us vaccines, space travel, and for my daughter, the ability to stream cat videos at 4K resolution. But here's the thing. A tool is only as useful as the job it's designed for. You wouldn't use a baseball bat to cut a loaf of bread, and you wouldn't use a telescope to read a book. So why do so many skeptics treat the scientific method as if it's the only way to discover truth? The scientific method works like this: observe, hypothesize, experiment, repeat. It's all about testing things that are measurable, observable, and repeatable. That's how we figure out, say, the boiling point of water or the speed of light. But, and here's the key, science is only good at answering how questions. How does gravity work? How does the heart pump blood? What science can't do is answer the ultimate why questions. We talked about, why is there a universe in the first place? Why does anything exist at all? For that, you need something else. So I want to take a few moments here to break down some areas where science is just not equipped to help. All right, first, let's look at metaphysics, questions of existence and purpose. We've already asked these questions. Science can't touch them because they're not about the physical world. You can't put the meaning of life under a microscope or test the purpose of existence in a lab. Atheistic naturalism often sidesteps these questions, offering a hollow, we're just cosmic accidents answer. But here's the problem. If we're just accidents, why do we even care about purpose in the first place? Why does the question keep nagging at us? Next, it's not equipped to help us deal with morality, determining things like right and wrong. Science can tell you what is. It can explain chemical reactions in your brain when you feel sympathy, but it can't tell you what ought to be. Take Richard Dawkins, for example. In River Out of Eden, he famously writes, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." Think about that for a second. If there's no good or evil, how does Dawkins justify any moral claim? Why should we care about social justice or human rights? His worldview saws off the very branch it's sitting on. Okay? Next up, we have aesthetics, judging beauty or artistic value. Is the Mona Lisa beautiful? Why does a sunset take my wife's breath away? Science can measure wavelengths of light or the brain's chemical response to beauty, but it can't tell you why art moves us or why we long for things that are beautiful. These are questions of the soul, not the lab. And then there's history. See, science works great for things that can be repeated, but history isn't repeatable unless we don't learn from it. But that's a different conversation. You can't run an experiment to recreate the resurrection of Jesus or the signing of the Declaration of Independence. For that, you need historical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and a dose of logical reasoning. Skeptics who demand scientific proof for these events are asking for the wrong tool. And so here's why all this matters. When skeptics claim that science is the only way to know truth, they're making a category error. They're treating a screwdriver like a universal tool, then wondering why it can't hammer a nail. By insisting on a purely scientific approach, they miss out on entire fields of knowledge. So let's ask a few questions here. If science is the only way to know things, how do you know that? You didn't learn it through science. Because, as we talked about, that's a what? A philosophical assumption. Why do we long for meaning, morality, and beauty if we're just accidental clumps of cosmic goo? If there's no objective morality, what makes anything wrong? Why condemn murder or oppression? How do you justify the intelligibility of the universe? Why can we even practice science at all? Let's take the legendary atheist Sam Harris, for instance. In his book, The Moral Landscape, Harris argues that science can determine human values. He claims that morality is just about as maximizing well-being and minimizing suffering. That sounds good on the surface, right? But let's take that shovel out and dig a little deeper, and the flaws will really start to show. First, who defines well-being? What makes your version of well-being better than someone else's? Second, why should we care about well-being in the first place? See, Harris borrows moral values like sympathy and compassion from a worldview he outright rejects. He's raiding the Christian pantry while denying the existence of the kitchen. But let's push a little further. If humans are just evolved animals, why is it morally wrong to harm one another? Lions kill zebras and no one calls it murder. Harris's system crumbles because he's trying to ground morality in science, which can't provide oughts, what we ought to do. He's smuggling in moral assumptions without admitting it. It's like claiming you don't believe in cars while borrowing your neighbor's Honda every weekend, okay? But here's the good news. Science isn't the enemy of faith, it's a partner. Science gives us knowledge of the physical world, but faith, philosophy, history, and personal experience answer the deeper questions, and together they all form a more complete picture of reality. Faith and purpose tell us why the universe exists and why our lives have meaning. Philosophy and reason give us the tools to ask the big questions science can't touch. History and evidence, the historical method helps us evaluate unique, non-repeatable events, like the resurrection. Personal experience confirms truths that science can't measure, like hope, love, and drive. So here's my challenge to skeptics. If science is your only tool, what do you do with the questions it can't answer? If you're more than just a machine of neurons firing in a random universe, where does that more come from? The scientific method is powerful, but it's not enough. To truly understand reality, you need different tools working together, okay? And with that cleared up, I'm now going to uncover how faith actually empowers science, how some of the greatest scientific minds were driven by a belief in the Christian God, and why science thrives in a worldview that acknowledges purpose. So I want you to imagine where the night sky was just a meaningless expanse of twinkling lights, where the mysteries of nature were feared instead of explored, and where the universe was considered chaotic and unknowable. That was the mindset of many ancient civilizations, until something remarkable happened. Along came men and women whose faith told them something different. The world wasn't random or chaotic. It was designed by a creator. It was orderly, purposeful, and knowable because the mind behind it was intelligent and consistent. Let me tell you something that you won't find highlighted in your average science textbook. Many of the fathers of modern science weren't just scientists, they were theologians, deeply committed to understanding the God who created the universe. These pioneers didn't see their faith as a hindrance to science. No, quite the opposite. They believed their faith compelled them to study the world, to uncover its secrets, and to marvel at the genius of its design. So let's be clear. The scientific revolution didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't born in a secular world, but in a culture deeply shaped by Christian theology. Why? Because Christianity taught that the universe was created by an intelligent God, which meant it operated under consistent, discoverable laws. Think about it. If you believe the world was ruled by capricious gods or random chance, why bother looking for patterns or laws at all? But if you believe in a creator who is rational, orderly, and consistent, then you have every reason to expect that the universe reflects those qualities. And here's the kicker. Many of the early scientific fathers weren't just believers, they were passionate about their faith. Johannes Kepler, for example, famously described science as thinking God's thoughts after him. Let that sink in. He didn't see science as a way to replace God, he saw it as a way to glorify him. And that, my friends, is where we'll leave off for this episode. All right, so as we close part 1 of our Faith First Science episode, I want to leave with this thought. The more we study creation, the more we understand the Creator, the more we understand science isn't an enemy of faith. It's a lens that magnifies God's greatness. And if this episode has stirred something in you, don't stop here. Our next episode, Faith vs. Science Part 2, will carry the conversation forward, looking at famous scientists whose pursuit of God led to major advancements. We'll look at disagreements within the field of science, and we'll get a little theological with our science and do some scriptural observations and much, much more. All right, until then, keep seeking, keep exploring, and keep thinking. Put on the mind of Christ and pursue Him with everything you have. I'm Shaun Michael with the Apex Apologetic Podcast, out.